Alaska in winter is not just cold. It is a place where the sun abandons you for months, where temperatures drop so low that your breath freezes before it leaves your lungs, where the darkness is so complete that you can't tell the difference between closing your eyes and keeping them open. And in that darkness, in those mountains, something waits. Something that has been frozen for 10,000 years. Until now. My name is Warren Blackwood. I'm a geologist working for the Alaska Department of Natural Resources. In January of 2025, I was sent to conduct a survey in the Chugach Mountains, east of Anchorage. The assignment was straightforward. Document geological formations along a proposed mining route, collect rock samples, and assess environmental impact. Standard work. I'd done it dozens of times before. But this time was different. This time, we found something that had been buried in the permafrost since the last ice age. Something that should have stayed frozen. I arrived at base camp on January 8th. The team consisted of 4 people. Myself, a field assistant named Kira Vaughn, a helicopter pilot named Sergei Volkov, and a Dena'ina people's guide named Robert Miska. Robert was there because the area we were surveying bordered traditional hunting grounds. The Dena'ina people had stories about these mountains, old stories, about things that lived in the ice long before humans arrived. Robert told us one of those stories on our first night in camp. We were sitting around a propane heater in the main tent. Outside, the temperature was 30 below zero. The wind was howling down from the peaks with a sound like grinding metal. Robert was drinking coffee, staring at the tent wall. My grandfather used to trap in these mountains, he said quietly, back in the 50s. He told me about a winter when 3 trappers went missing. Not lost, not frozen, missing. They found their cabins empty, food still on the table, fires still burning, but the trappers were gone. And in the snow around each cabin, they found tracks. Not animal tracks, not human tracks, something else. Something that walked on 2 legs but left prints twice as long as a man's and only 4 toes. Kira laughed nervously. "Old trapper stories," she said. "They probably just got drunk and wandered off." Robert didn't laugh. "My grandfather said they found one of them 2 months later, frozen solid, standing upright in a snowdrift, eyes open, no wounds, no signs of struggle, just frozen. Like he'd been flash frozen from the inside out." The tent was quiet after that. We started the survey work the next morning. The helicopter dropped us at the first survey site, a rocky outcrop at 4,500 feet elevation. The plan was simple: spend 6 hours documenting the area, collect samples, and return to base camp before dark. In January, this far north, before dark meant before 3 p.m. We had maybe 5 hours of usable daylight. Kira and I worked quickly, setting up instruments, taking measurements, photographing formations. Around 11 a.m., I noticed something unusual. A section of exposed rock face that showed clear evidence of recent melting and refreezing. That was odd. At these temperatures, ice doesn't melt. I moved closer to examine it. That's when I saw the cave. It wasn't large, maybe 6 feet across at the opening, but it went back into the mountain farther than my headlamp could reach. The walls inside were pure ice, not snow that had compacted, solid, clear, glacial ice. And inside that ice, I could see something. "Kiera," I called out. "Come look at this." She joined me at the cave entrance. I pointed my light at the wall. "Do you see that?" She leaned in closer. "Is that bone?" It was a massive bone, embedded in the ice about 10 feet inside the cave. It looked like a femur, but the scale was wrong, too large for any animal that should exist at this altitude. "We need to document this," Kiera said. She was already pulling out her camera. We spent the next hour photographing and measuring. The bone was approximately 5 feet long. The ice around it was estimated to be at least 10,000 years old, based on the depth and clarity. Whatever this creature was, it had died during the Pleistocene epoch, and it had been frozen ever since. We returned to base camp that evening and showed Robert the photographs. He looked at them for a long time. Then he closed the laptop. "You need to stop the survey," he said. "What? Why?" Kiera asked. "Because that's not a bone from an animal," Robert said. "That's what my grandfather called an old one. Something that lived here before the ice came. Something that the ice trapped. And if the permafrost is melting enough for you to see it now, that means it's waking up." Kiera rolled her eyes. "Robert, with all respect, that's mythology. What we found is probably a woolly mammoth or an extinct bear. Then why is the ice melting in January, in 30 below temperatures?" We didn't have an answer for that. The next morning, we returned to the cave. Sergei dropped us at the same location and promised to return at 2 p.m. for extraction. Kiera and I hiked to the cave entrance. It had changed. The opening was larger, maybe 8 feet across now, and the ice inside was covered in a thin layer of water. Liquid water, in 30 below temperatures. That shouldn't be possible. I put my hand near the cave wall. It was warm. Not hot, but noticeably warmer than the surrounding air. "This doesn't make sense," Kiera said. "Something is generating heat inside this mountain." We ventured deeper into the cave. Slowly, carefully. The ice walls were slick. Water was running down them in thin streams. 20 feet in, we reached the bone we'd seen yesterday. Except now, it wasn't fully encased in ice. The ice around it had melted. The bone was exposed, and it wasn't alone. There was a rib cage, massive, easily 10 feet across, and a skull, partially visible in the melting ice. The skull was wrong. It wasn't human, but it wasn't animal either. The proportions were off, too large, too elongated. The eye sockets were enormous, and the jaw had teeth. Not flat herbivore teeth, not pointed carnivore teeth, something in between, designed to tear and grind. "What is this?" Kiera whispered. Before I could answer, we heard a sound from deeper in the cave, a cracking like ice breaking under pressure, and then a breath, deep, slow, wet. Something was breathing in the darkness ahead of us. We ran. Didn't look back. Didn't stop to collect equipment. Just ran. We made it back to the extraction point 30 minutes early. Called Sergei on the radio. "We need immediate pickup. Something is wrong at the site." Sergei's voice crackled back. "Define wrong. Just get here, now." The helicopter arrived 15 minutes later. We climbed aboard. As we lifted off, I looked back at the cave entrance, and I saw something standing at the opening. tall, maybe 12 feet, humanoid in shape but wrong in every proportion. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and it was watching us. Back at base camp, we reported what we'd seen to the district supervisor. He listened, took notes, then said, "I'm pulling the survey team. We'll send a specialized unit to investigate the cave. In the meantime, pack up. You're leaving tomorrow." We packed that night, but I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard something outside the tent. Heavy footsteps in the snow. Heavy, deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped outside. The camp was empty, but there were tracks leading from the tree line to our tent and then back again. The tracks were massive, at least 18 inches long, 4 toes, just like Robert's grandfather had described. We left the next morning. The helicopter flew us back to Anchorage. 2 weeks later, I received a call from the Department of Natural Resources. The specialized team had been sent to investigate the cave. They found it collapsed, sealed by what appeared to be a deliberate avalanche. No sign of the skeleton, no evidence of the creature we'd seen. The official report stated, "Geological instability, site unsuitable for survey work, no further investigation warranted." But I know what we saw, and I know what's still out there in those mountains, thawed, awake, and watching. 3 months after we left, a trapper went missing in the Chugach Range. They found his cabin empty, fire still burning, food on the table, and tracks in the snow. 18 inches long, 4 toes. Alaska in winter is not just cold, it's a place where things that should have died millennia ago can be preserved, perfectly, waiting. And when the ice melts, even just a little, they wake up, and they remember what it was like before humans arrived, when they were the ones who did the hunting.
Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Now, let's get started. Imagine you are the only outsider in a village of 40 people, sitting at a dinner table where everyone is eating in complete silence. No one speaks. No one looks up. And then, from somewhere outside, from the direction of the frozen lake, a bell rings. One slow, deep toll. Every person at the table stops chewing at the exact same moment. Every head turns toward the window. Every face goes the same shade of pale. And the oldest woman in the room looks directly at you, the only one who does, and whispers, "Don't go outside tonight. Whatever you hear, whatever it sounds like, don't open the door." My name is Calvin Marsh. I was a freelance ethnographer, someone who travels to remote communities to document local customs, oral histories, and cultural traditions. I had spent years doing this kind of work. Remote villages in northern Canada, isolated fishing settlements in Scandinavia, a winter season with a reindeer herding community in Siberia. I thought I had seen every variation of isolated human life. I thought I understood what it meant to be somewhere the rest of the world had forgotten. I was wrong. The village of Tulvak sits on the western edge of interior Alaska, pressed against the base of a mountain range that has no name on most maps. Population: 41 people the last time anyone officially counted. The nearest road, if you can call a gravel track maintained once every 2 years a road, is 60 miles east. In winter, which in Tulvak runs from October through late April, the village is completely unreachable by ground. A small supply plane comes in once a month when weather allows, landing on a flat stretch of frozen lake that serves as the airstrip. I arrived on one of those supply planes in the third week of November. I had been in contact with a woman named Sarah Voss, a village elder, who had agreed after 18 months of letters to allow me to document the oral traditions of Tulvak, specifically the stories surrounding what the villagers called a nook. In the correspondence, Sarah had described a nook simply as the Old Watcher, a presence the village had acknowledged for generations, something between a spirit, a force of nature, and a warning. I had treated it as folklore, material to document and analyze. I packed my recorder, my notebooks, my camera, and I stepped off that supply plane thinking I was going to work. I had no idea that in Tulvak, the line between the story and the thing the story describes had never been drawn in the first place. The village was smaller than I expected, a cluster of low timber houses arranged in a rough semicircle around a central clearing that held a fire pit, a storage building, and a wooden pole from which hung a large iron bell. The bell was old, much older than the village structures around it. Its surface was dark with age and weather, and it hung perfectly still even when the wind moved through the clearing. That stillness was the first thing I noticed. The wind would bend the nearby spruce trees, scatter loose snow across the ground, catch the edges of rooftops and make them groan, but the bell never moved. Sarah Voss met me at the edge of the clearing. She was a small woman, somewhere past 70, with the kind of face that has stopped trying to hide what it has been through. Deep lines, clear eyes, a stillness about her that matched the bell. She shook my hand without smiling and said, "You came at the wrong time of year. I told you spring would be better." "You said spring in your third letter. Your fourth letter said November was fine." She looked at me for a moment. "I don't remember writing that." I let it go. Travel fatigue, miscommunication. She led me to the house where I'd be staying, a single room attached to the home of a family called the Petrovs. Clean, sparse, a cot, a wood stove, a small window that looked out at the frozen lake. Meals are communal. 7 o'clock, the main house. Be there or go without. "Of course, and we can begin the interviews tomorrow," she said. "Tonight, you eat and you sleep. And if you hear the bell ring tonight," she paused, her hand still on the doorframe, not looking at me, "come and tell me in the morning. Don't go out to look at it yourself." She left before I could ask why. I settled in, unpacked my equipment, and made notes. Through my small window, I watched the clearing. The bell hung motionless in the gray afternoon light. The village moved quietly around it, people crossing between houses, carrying things, going about the compressed, efficient business of winter survival in a place where inefficiency costs lives. Nobody lingered near the bell. Nobody looked at it directly. That was the second thing I noticed. At 7, I walked to the main house. 14 people were already seated at 2 long tables. More arrived behind me. Nobody spoke. I had sat through silent meals before in other communities. Some cultures treat eating as a sacred act, not a social one. I assumed this was something similar. I sat where I was gestured to sit, across from a man about my age with the build of someone who has been doing physical labor since childhood. He looked at his plate. The food was passed, bowls of thick stew, dark bread, preserved fish, the sound of spoons and cups, nothing else. I was reaching for the bread when the bell rang. One low, resonant toll that rolled through the walls of the house and landed somewhere inside my chest rather than just in my ears. Every hand at both tables stopped moving at the same moment.
every head turned toward the window. The color left the room. Not just the faces, the room itself seemed to dim, as though the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in a single second. I looked at Sarah. She was already looking at me. She said, very quietly, "Don't go outside tonight. Whatever you hear, whatever it sounds like, don't open the door." Then she picked up her spoon and continued eating. One by one, everyone else did the same. Nobody spoke for the rest of the meal. I sat there with my bread halfway to my mouth, trying to understand what had just happened. Back in my room, I sat at the edge of the cot and opened my notebook. I wrote, "Bell, iron, old. Rings on its own, no wind observed. Community response, unified, immediate, significant. Possible ritual significance. Ask Sarah in the morning. Do not go outside tonight." That last line I had written automatically. I stared at it. Then I put down my pen and looked out the window at the clearing. The bell was still. The clearing was empty. The only light came from the windows of the surrounding houses, small warm squares pressing back against the enormous Alaskan dark. I decided to sleep early. At some point after midnight, I awoke, not to the bell, to the sound of someone outside my window. Footsteps in the snow, slow, even, unhurried, crossing the clearing from the direction of the lake. I sat up. The footsteps stopped directly outside my window. Silence. Then a voice. Low, clear, a woman's voice, or something very close to it, speaking words I couldn't quite parse, syllables that almost resolved into language but not quite, as though I were hearing a conversation through a wall and my brain kept insisting it almost understood. Then a knock on my window. 3 times. Patient, like someone who had done this before, like someone who expected to be let in. My hand was halfway to the window latch before I caught myself. I pulled my hand back, sat in the dark, listened to my own breathing. The voice came again, softer this time, almost gentle, almost familiar in a way I couldn't explain, like a voice that had studied how to sound like someone you trusted without actually met anyone you trusted. I pressed my back against the wall opposite the window. I did not sleep again that night. At first light, the footsteps were gone. The snow beneath my window showed no marks. Nothing. I told Sarah at breakfast. She listened without expression. When she finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Did you open the window?" "No." "Did you speak back to it?" "No." Something in her face shifted very slightly. Relief, I thought. "Good. Come with me." She took me to a small building at the back of the village that I hadn't noticed on arrival, set slightly apart from the others. Older in construction, its walls reinforced with what looked like old driftwood bound with strips of hide. Inside, it was one room. The walls were covered in carved markings, not decorative, dense, layered, serious. Generations of the same symbols applied over and over, as though repetition were the point. In the center was a low wooden table. On it, a bowl of ash, a bundle of dried grass, and a drawing on old paper that had been pressed flat under a piece of river glass. The drawing showed the village from above, the semicircle of houses, the central clearing, the lake beyond, and in the lake, something. A shape beneath the ice, rough and vast, with no clear edges. Around it, a series of concentric rings like ripples frozen in place, and from the shape, a single line extending across the ice, crossing the clearing, reaching the bell. I looked at Sarah. She was sitting across from me. She folded her hands. Tulvak has been here for 160 years. My grandmother's grandmother helped build the first 3 houses. Before the houses were the people who were here before us. They left the bell. Who were they? We don't know their name. We know what they knew. She touched the edge of the drawing. There is something in the lake. It has always been in the lake. Our word for it, Anuk, doesn't translate exactly. The closest I can give you is the hunger that listens. It is not a creature in the way you would understand. It is more like a condition, a presence. It has been beneath that ice for longer than anyone's memory reaches. And the bell? I asked. The bell is the agreement.
She explained it slowly, in the way someone explains something they have explained many times to people who will not fully believe them until it is too late. Anak, she said, was aware. Not intelligent in a human sense, but aware in the way a current is aware of a riverbank. It presses, it finds gaps, it moves through whatever gives way. For generations, Tulvak had maintained what Sarah called the agreement. The bell was the centerpiece of it. When Anak moved, when it shifted beneath the ice, when it stretched toward the surface, the bell rang, on its own, without wind or hands. It was the signal. The signal meant, it is awake. Do not go out. Do not make sound. Do not respond to anything you hear outside, regardless of what it sounds like. Because Anak, Sarah explained, had a method. It listens, she said. Over time, it has heard everything, every voice in this village, every name, every sound a person makes when they are afraid or lonely or desperate to be heard. It uses those sounds. It builds from them. It comes to the edge of the village in the night and it calls to people in voices they recognize. Parents, children, friends, sometimes the voice of someone who died. If you answer, if you go to the door, if you open the window, if you call back, it knows you can be reached, and it doesn't stop. I sat with that for a moment. How many people has it taken? I asked. Sarah looked at the drawing. Over 160 years? 11 that we know of. 3 I knew personally. And the ones it takes, what happens to them? She shook her head, not refusing to answer, more like the answer was something she had decided not to carry in words. They go to the lake, she said finally. In the morning, there are marks in the ice, a place where something came up from below and then went back down. We don't search the lake. We stopped doing that a long time ago. I should have left on the next supply plane. I know that now. I have known it for years. But I was a researcher, and what Sarah had just described to me was the most intact, most living piece of folklore I had ever encountered. Not a story someone remembered their grandparents telling, not a legend that had been diluted by time into metaphor. This community believed completely and without hesitation in the thing they were describing, and they had organized their entire way of life around it. I told myself I was documenting. I told myself I was being objective. I stayed. Sarah agreed to continue the interviews over the following days. I learned the full architecture of the agreement. The bell could not be removed. 3 times in the village's history, someone had tried either to melt it down or to throw it into the lake or simply to relocate it to the edge of the tree line. Each time, within 48 hours, it was back in the clearing, standing upright, exactly where it had always been. The carvings in the small back building were what Sarah called the record.
every sighting, every incident, every time the bell had rung, marked in symbols that the village maintained as a living document. She pointed to a dense cluster of markings in the lower left corner of the wall. That was the winter of 1987, the worst we have recorded. The bell rang 14 nights in a row. We lost 2 people. My husband was the second. She said it without a tremor, not because she didn't feel it, but because she had been carrying it long enough that it had become part of her structure. He went out on the 8th night, she said. He had been hearing our daughter's voice. She had died the previous spring. He thought, he knew it wasn't real. He knew, but 11 days of hearing her voice outside the door. She stopped. The knowing isn't always enough, I said. No, she said, it isn't.
On my 9th night in Tulvak, the bell rang again. I was already awake when it happened, sitting at my small desk, working on my notes by lamplight, when that low, rolling tone moved through the walls and settled in my chest. I put down my pen. The village went quiet in a particular way. Not the silence of an empty place, but the silence of 40 people simultaneously holding still. I checked the latch on my window. I checked the latch on my door. I turned my lamp down low, and I waited. For a long time, nothing. Just the creak of the house in the cold and the wind off the mountains. Then I heard it. A voice. Outside, on the other side of my window. A voice I recognized. My sister's voice. My sister Nora, who lived in Seattle, who I had last spoken to 3 weeks before I flew to Alaska, who had no reason to be anywhere near this village, who was 3,000 miles away. Her voice, exactly. Not close, not muffled, clear and precise, as though she were standing right there in the snow, saying my name the way she always said it, with the slight upward lilt at the end, the way she'd always done since we were kids. Calvin? Calvin, it's me. I'm here. Can you hear me? It's cold. My hand moved to the latch on the window. I caught it. I made myself sit back down. I put both hands flat on the desk. That is not her, I said aloud, quietly, just to hear myself say it, to remind myself that my voice was in this room, not out it. That is not her. The voice came again. This time, Calvin, please, I don't know how I got here. I'm scared. Please let me in. The tone of it, the exact specific helplessness that I had heard in my sister's voice when she was frightened, the particular quality of her fear. I have no other way to describe how precise it was. It was not an imitation. It was a replica, built from something that had been listening to human voices for 160 years, that had heard every variation of grief and desperation and longing that 40 people across generations could produce, and had learned. That is not her, I said again. I sat at that desk with my hands flat on the surface and my eyes on the lamp flame until the voice stopped. It took a long time. It tried several variations, confused, then frightened, then angry, then quiet and almost hurt, which was the hardest one to sit through. Then, nothing. At some point after that, I slept. In the morning, Sarah was already awake when I came to find her. She looked at me and said, "It called to you." "Yes."
Whose voice? My sister. She nodded slowly, as though this were not a surprise, as though this were part of a known process. It chooses a voice from the first night, whatever moves through the window when it passes. The voice it hears you respond to in your sleep, your breathing, your movements. It reads those things. It was exact, I said. The voice was exact. Yes, she said. It gets better the longer it listens. She paused. You should go home, Calvin. I still have documentation to. Go home, she said again, not unkindly, not as a threat, with the patient weight of someone who has watched this unfold before. You are not from here. You don't have the years of understanding in your body. You know it in your head now. You know what it is. But knowing in your head is not the same as knowing in your bones. And it will keep coming. Every night you stay, it learns a little more about you. And the more it learns, the harder it becomes to stay at the desk. I thought about my hand on the window latch, how fast it had moved before I caught it. When is the next supply plane? She said. 4 days. I looked at her. I'll teach you the practices, what we do during the nights it's active, how to keep the door between you and the knowing. 4 days is manageable. I've kept people safe here for 40 years. She stood up and put her hand briefly on my arm. But after that plane comes, you get on it. Those 4 days were the longest of my life. The bell rang on 2 of the remaining 3 nights. The first time, my sister's voice came back. This time it added details, the name of our childhood dog, a specific argument we had when I was 19, the sound of our mother's house at Christmas. Exact. All of it. Exact. I sat at the desk, with my hands flat and my eyes on the lamp flame, until the voice stopped. It took a long time. It tried several variations, confused, then frightened, then angry, then quiet, and almost hurt, which was the hardest one to sit through. Then, nothing. At some point after that, I slept. The next night, it changed tactics entirely. Instead of my sister's voice, it used my own voice. My own voice from outside the window, calm, measured, reasonable, telling me that I had misunderstood the situation, that Anuk was not what Sarah had described, that the village was keeping me in the dark for their own reasons, that I should open the window and see for myself. It knew my professional instincts. It had been listening to me work for 9 days, my habit of questioning assumptions, of looking for the alternative explanation, of being skeptical of the official story. It used all of it. I sat at the desk for 4 hours with my own voice outside the window, patiently dismantling every reason I had to stay put. When it finally stopped, I was trembling in a way that had nothing to do with the cold.
The supply plane came on schedule. I packed in 20 minutes. Sarah walked me to the lake, the frozen airstrip, and we stood side by side in the cutting wind, watching the small plane touch down. "Will you ever write about this?" she asked. I thought about it. "Not as research," I said finally. "I don't think the framework I came here with is capable of describing what this place actually is." She seemed satisfied with that. The pilot was already unloading supply crates, moving fast to get back in the air. I turned to Sarah. "How do you stay?" I asked. "How does anyone stay, knowing what's out there in that lake?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because it is our lake,"
she said simply. "And Anak has been there longer than we have. We made an agreement a long time ago. We keep our side, it keeps its side." "Does it always keep its side?" "No," she said, "but neither do we." She held out her hand. I shook it. She looked at me with those clear, still eyes and said, "When you get home, call your sister. Use your actual phone. Hear her actual voice. Do it before you go to sleep tonight." I nodded. "And Calvin," she held on to my hand for just a moment longer, "if you ever hear that voice again, anywhere, at home, in a city, on a street, wherever you are, don't answer." I flew back to Anchorage, then Seattle, then home. I called my sister from the airport. She answered on the second ring, surprised to hear from me, full of ordinary life, her kids, a work problem, what she was making for dinner. I listened to every word, cataloged the specific sound of her, the real her, the one who didn't know anything about Tulvak or bells or frozen lakes. When we hung up, I sat in the airport for a long time before I could make myself move. That was 3 years ago. I have not returned to Alaska. I have not published any research from the trip. My notebooks from those 9 days sit in a box in my study. I have opened them twice. Both times I closed them again quickly. Not because of what I wrote, because of what's written on the last page in handwriting that is almost mine. I don't remember writing it, but I know when it was written. Sometime during those 4 nights in the village, during the hours I was sitting at the desk, hands flat, lamp low, listening to something outside teach itself to be me. It says, "You should have opened the window." Sarah Voss passed away 8 months after I left Tulvak. I learned this from the pilot who had flown me in. He told me she died in her sleep, peacefully, and that the village was doing fine. He said the new elder was a younger woman, competent and well-respected. He said the supply runs were going smoothly. He said everything was normal. I thanked him and ended the call. I did not ask about the bell. I did not ask whether it had rung the night Sarah died. Some things you decide not to know, because the knowing doesn't help, and the thing on the other side of the window is still out there under that ice, and it is still listening, and it already knows my name. Friends, that was the story of Calvin Marsh, a man who went looking for a legend and found that Tulvak's legend had already found him first. If this story gave you chills, give it a like. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who love stories told in the dark. Subscribe and hit the bell icon. And yes, I am aware of the irony of saying that after this particular story. Consider it intentional. Drop a comment below and tell me, if you heard the voice of someone you love outside your window tonight, do you think you would stay at the desk? I'd like to believe I would, but I still think about how fast my hand moved toward that latch. Until next time, keep your windows closed, and if something out there sounds exactly like someone you love, let it keep talking. Don't answer.
Friends, that was the story for today. I hope you enjoyed it and that it stayed with you in the best chilling way possible. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you. Your time and support truly mean more than you know. This channel is growing because of listeners like you. If you want more real and disturbing encounters like this, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel continue bringing these stories to life. And if this story gave you chills, let me know in the comments. I read them all, and your thoughts make this community stronger. Until next time,
Turn off the lights, double-check the room, and I'll see you in the next story.